All right. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we are talking about going from builder to boardroom. So how do you make the shift from being a technical manager to being an executive thought leader? And we've got a phenomenal panel today. I'm joined with some of Colorado's top executives to tell us a little bit about their journey as they've gone from a hands-on manager to being an executive leader in the VP and C level. So my name is Ted Helmuth. I'm the founder of IQ Clarity. We are on a mission to be the world's most recommended tech and creative recruiting firm. I'm also the co-founder of IQ Labs. We're helping companies build, deploy, and optimize their agentic workflows. And why are we here today? So we've been engaged on a couple of executive searches this year, and I noticed a theme as we started sending candidates, getting feedback. They'd get to a second or third round interview. And a lot of what happened was we would get, hey, they're a great technical leader. They don't quite have the strategic thought experience that we're looking for this role. So I noticed that that's not something that you necessarily learn on the job as a manager. It's something that you sort of acquire over time as your level of responsibility increases. So what I wanted to hear is from a tremendous panel how they've made that transformation and maybe could give us some insights on how they did it. So welcome all. I'm going to do a quick intro of our panel, who they are, and where they currently are working. And then we're going to dive in and get the discussion going. So first and foremost, let's introduce some of our panelists. I've got my little cheat sheet here. So Lucy Donaldson, CIO of Globus family of brands. I hope I'm not mistaken in saying it's a global tour operator and cruise line. So lots of fun things in the vacation and tourism industry. Matthew Beckman, Vice President of Engineering at Magic School. Magic School is one of the fastest growing companies in Colorado. They offer AI solutions for school districts. We've got Brandon Grady. Brandon is the CTO at Lido. They provide content and workflow solutions. And Brandon can tell us a little bit more about that as he just joined there not too long ago. So Bob Stone is the Vice President of Architecture at SnapDocs. SnapDocs is in the mortgage industry, providing e-closing software. Mary Moore Simmons. Mary is the CTO at CampMinder. CampMinder, my kids have gone to summer camp, and we've used some of CampMinder's technology to get little videos of them and pictures of them while they're playing around at camp. So love it's software for summer camps. And then we have Steve Peck. Steve is the CTO at SmartCar. SmartCar provides connected vehicle solutions, and I like to take credit for moving Steve from the mountains down here to the lowlands here in Denver. So welcome, Steve. We're glad to have you. I think I got most of the panel, so thank you all for joining. Let's dive right in. So a couple questions that I threw out to the audience, or threw out to the panel. And audience, if you have a question, there is a chat bot. So put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring those. And midway through the panel, we'll likely ask a few questions from the audience, and then we'll have time at the end to get questions from the panel as well. So first question I'd love to hear from the panel is, how has your leadership style changed as you've evolved from hands-on manager to more of an executive leader? So more on leadership style. Steve, I'll let you start things off.
Sure, I'll take a crack at that one. So, I think early earlier in my career, I led kind of by proximity and being close to the code and architecture and sort of individual IC people decisions. And oftentimes you kind of led through making sure that somehow you got to the best answer. What you have to learn, I think, from an executive level is your job is not to necessarily have the best answer, but to create the conditions where the organization produces great answers. And so that, I think, context shift and being able to do that at an organizational optimization level is where I think I see the change and the difference. That said, I think it's also super important to not lose touch with what your team and organization is actually doing and being able to help kind of guide, steer, and make suggestions as well that are relevant to their day to day. So I'll stop there.
Lucy?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that, which is, I think the decision-making moves from, now having really good conversations around trade-offs, right? It's not just a one or another. It's about, okay, how do we get to the right outcome? We're going to have to trade off, a couple of things, right? Do we have the right resourcing in place to solve that problem? Do we have the right competency? And so, moving the dialogue from tactical to more strategic, I think has largely been the biggest shift change for me. And then obviously then layering up that conversation to, the executive team and putting it in their words or in their understanding as well.
Love it. Mary, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Steve and Lucy had said so far. And I would add to that, I think one of the changes that I have made is how to scale my leadership to larger organizations. So having one-on-one conversations with everybody on the team was easy, and it helps you stay up to date. You could be in the daily stand-ups, you could be very present, but then as you start to move up, your tools and processes that you use have to scale up. So you have to put more metrics in place. You have to put more systems in place that allow you to get that visibility that you need to help the team make the decisions, and then also to help hold your leaders accountable for the performance of them and their teams.
Love that. Let's see. And then Brandon, how about you?
Yeah, just one thing that I think is additive here. One thing that was maybe surprising to me, and it shouldn't be, but it was. A lot of things end up being surprising when they shouldn't be. Your leadership starts to extend beyond your team, and that could be true below the VP and the CTO level, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But once you get it to the VP and the CTO level, you're looked at as a leader in other groups. So establishing those relationships outside those groups becomes very important, and something you can do today. Something I didn't very, very much invest in earlier on in my career, which I wish I probably would have wanted to.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit about, I think when you make the transition, there's also some things that you have to leave behind. So what did you have to unlearn to kind of step up the ladder a little bit or adjust your strategic thinking? Matthew.
Yeah, I think this hopefully will resonate with everybody, but the details and how I care about the details. And I think in almost all contexts, engineers grow in their career because they're hyper across all of the details, and they can articulate that, and they can talk about the technical complexity that they're managing. And when you get into the boardroom or the executive session, that has almost no bearing at all. You're talking about risk and opportunity. You're talking about trade-offs. You're talking about timelines. The name of the specific technology we might be talking about isn't super relevant. It's the business outcome that you have to focus on. And I think I spent a lot of time coaching this in my managers. You got to be thoughtful. Like, what are you going to say? What's the message you're trying to deliver? And it shouldn't be about queue depth and throughput and these things that for engineers are like super important, it shifts really dramatically. The kinds of details you care about have to change, and how you talk about it has to change.
How about you?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think one of the things I had to forget is that I actually know how to do something when I'm not going to be the one doing it. It was really important that I can be a resource to somebody, but if we have to change our CI/CD process, I know exactly what I could do, but you need to solve it. You can come to me and I'll give you insights I have, but I need the team to own it, and the team can't own it if I'm trying to like suggest things constantly and tweak it and be, you know, back with my IC hat on and trying to code it up. You know, you have to let some of that go, and you have to learn how to ensure the outcome is defined and not how the person is going to get there that you're asking to lead that, whether that's a director or a senior manager. You need them to own it, and for them to fully own it, you have to let go of the fact that you could do it too.
Always going to be pulling you back, no matter how hard you try. So sometimes it's an uphill battle. But well, what changes as you go from leading ICs, individual contributors, to kind of being a manager of managers, or even, you know, higher level, managing other leaders that are at director and above? So what changed in your leadership style, or kind of how you operate? Aaron?
Yeah, the thing that had to change for me was the level that I held people accountable to. So when you're working with individuals, you're way more in the details of what's going on, micro adjustments that people need to make. You can provide that feedback on a very specific daily time frame and from that perspective. But as you start to manage people who are higher up, you are holding them accountable to large outcomes or large things that they need to deliver, and you're working with them to tie the work that they're doing to outcomes for the business. But then also one of the most difficult things that I continue to have to push on with leaders is how to make sure that they're effectively communicating to their teams as well, because you don't always get to see those communications. But those are incredibly important. And it's also the place where I see the most disconnect, where I'm trying to provide all the information and context and put systems in place to hold teams accountable to outcomes so that they can be empowered. But then if the leader is not doing a great job of like doing that all the way down, it causes a lot of issues. So that's one thing that is like a tricky thing that I've always working on with leaders.
Absolutely. How much structure do you give the leaders on your team? Do you empower them to build their own, or do you kind of give them some guidance?
And I'm sure that the rest of the panel would say this too, but it depends on the person. Some people want a lot more structure and guidance, and some people want a lot less. I find it easier for me to manage in a system where they don't want as much structure and guidance, and they want more big picture. What am I trying to achieve? And then I can partner with them to figure out where they need support rather than me really needing to provide all that structure up front. I prefer the first one.
Awesome. Lucy?
I was just going to add, I think it's more around, it's no longer about status. It's about the context of how, you could sort of build the recommendations or anticipate the outputs or the outcomes actually. And I think one of the changes as well is you always have to think like 2-3 steps ahead, right? And understand like what's the wider ecosystem that's going to be impacted by the decision making, and how do you address that already downstream, right? So there's a very much, I'm surprised by how much like the risk lens comes into play in this role. And that's something that I've had to kind of like adjust in terms of the thinking as well, which is it's not just about me. It's not just about the status and the delivery that I'm doing. It's about what is that wider order of impacts that are going to happen downstream, so that you can have, you're kind of sitting in the middle, right? You need to be able to message up to your executive team, and then you have to be able to like message to, your management level as well.
Bob, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far, but one angle that struck me in my journey was trying to get a leader to navigate their team and personnel concerns is definitely a different muscle than being in the room and talking to that IC about their behaviors and their issues if there's issues. So I think it's an interesting switch where you're trying to help that leader understand how they're going to solve the issue. You're using a lot more questions. What do you want to do? And then maybe correct them. Oh, that's a terrible idea. But whatever it is you're trying to get them to learn and get across, it's different than just doing the thing. It's teaching them how to do it and supporting them as they navigate the problematic areas of leadership.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think I'll just build on what Bob had said. I think, for me, when you shift from, leading ICs to leading leaders, your job kind of shifts to building judgment and context and accountability and having that clarity. And it is much more about asking the right questions and guiding and helping them see what is needed versus you being, say, either I don't know, dictatorial or too detailed to say, hey, I know how to do this, right? Here's what you need to go do. And that doesn't really help build kind of the leadership team underneath you, and you have to kind of figure out how to activate that in each of your leaders.
We're going to get a little vulnerable here. What mistakes have you made along the way through this journey, and more so, what did you learn, Bob?
Exactly what Steve just said. Tried to hand somebody the solution and it wouldn't work, and I'd hand them the solution and it wouldn't work. And that was with people issues or with project issues. How I was going to do it didn't matter. So, had a few, I wouldn't call them failures, but, a lot of learnings in that area of I have to empower the person is different than all we need done is the outcome, right? And again, letting go of my way of doing it was definitely a big learning.
Awesome. Steve, why don't you piggyback on that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of easy to confuse alignment with agreement. And so, you might be in a meeting thinking everyone is aligned when no one pushes back. And then everybody goes away and executes, and you find out, oh, they weren't at all aligned. They were just agreeing, but not actually aligned on what needed to happen, or how something needed to occur. And so really drawing out the communication across different leaders and different teams to help make sure that there is actual alignment and not just kind of silent agreement and like, yeah. Okay, sounds good. But then no, like, so what do you have to do to be able to contribute to that outcome or decision, and making sure that you really draw that out with questions and follow through.
That's great. Matthew, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really going to agree with Steve here. I feel like I did a very bad job of active listening and recognizing when that lack of alignment or that uncertainty or that disagreement was being stated in a different way than it would have been when I was just a manager or when I was just a team lead. Sometimes speaking truth to power is scary for people, and you have to be really thoughtful about how you hear what's being said and asking other follow-up questions to ensure that like we're all in agreement, or maybe we aren't and people are just more reluctant to say that out loud because now you've got some big title.
Great. How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, I think Matthew said what I was going to say right at the end there. It's a mistake I made early on, and I continue to make almost weekly, and I constantly have to remind myself. But early on, when I got the title, I just presumed that I could approach conversations the exact same way I could when I didn't have the title. And I was in a room with architects and other directors and stuff. And when there's a lull in the conversation, it feels like people aren't progressing the conversation. I'll just say something dumb. I said, well, I think we should do this. And then the whole room just went, well, that's a terrible idea, but I guess that's what we have to do now. I'm like, no, that's not at all what I think we should do. I just want you guys to tell me why that's a bad idea. So that's a constant reminder. Like, I want to believe that the title doesn't matter and that you're just in there to have the conversation, but the title does matter to a lot of people, and you have to establish that trust well in advance of being able to do things the way that you normally used to be able to do them.
Great. Mary, how about you?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nods. I would also like to comment that everybody put their hand up on mistakes, because we're all just making mistakes out here. I think for me, one of the bigger mistakes was that as you're managing people who have larger scope, at least for me, it takes longer for me to realize when they're not the right fit, or it's not working out. And as a result of it taking longer, I have been accidentally become complacent and let things go on longer than they were supposed to, because I know that it takes longer for me to recognize the problem. Also, we talked earlier about getting information about what's going on the ground and getting that information. And so when that information isn't good enough, it makes it harder for you to recognize when a leader below you is not working well. So that was definitely a big mistake that I've made.
That's great. How about you, Lucy?
Yeah, so I totally agree with everything that I've made the same. But one of the things that I've realized in this role as well is I made the mistake of not communicating with the teams prior to presenting something, right? So getting that, you really do have to go and get that buy-in, like especially with your peers, right? And even though they're saying something to you in a public forum, it might not necessarily be truly how they might react in, on the back end. And so you almost become like, I think I underestimated how much I was becoming the voice for some of the changes that we were making. And so kind of getting them to sitting down with them prior and showing them, and talking to them about what I'm doing and getting their buy-in on an individual basis becomes so fundamental. And that was one of the mistakes that I had made early on when I was like presenting an idea, and I just assumed everybody kind of agreed. So that was a little lesson learned. And now it's like, I'm kind of like that person who just like, I'll sit down with everybody before we do anything like, super significant, and make sure that like they're agreeing so that we don't get, challenges when it's a public forum.
And what are some of the primary levers that you utilize to drive performance as an executive? What are some of the tools that you've used to make sure your team's operating at a high level? Matthew.
Yeah, I think whether you think of this as a lever or just a way to approach it, and others have said something similar, but bequeath responsibility and authority to your managers and your directors. Nothing could be more demoralizing in a performance sense than me or other people on this call showing up and telling those folks how they're supposed to operate. I focus on input and output metrics, and that is a conversation with those leaders. But then if the outcomes that they drive are aligned with what we agreed to from a metric standpoint, that encourages them to have that ownership and to create the high performing organization that the metrics ultimately drive, way more than me showing up and trying to give that kind of specific solutioning or trying to keep ownership at my level. And the other thing that I'll just say is radical candor. It is very difficult to offer feedback, all types, but particularly critical feedback. This is maybe the most important lever I have. Go ahead, Lucy.
So for me, it's just two things. One is less is more. right? So sequencing and making sure that you're helping to like prioritize the things that the right things. Obviously, that's, you know, things that are driven by data, things that are driven by metrics, right? So it's less about volume and it's more about making the business like rationalize that. And then second, I put my top talent on the things that matter. That's how I drive the performance.
I was also gonna mention metrics. I am a huge fan of metrics and of rolling out metrics that balance each other so that you're not over rotating on any one thing. But for me, I think putting things in terms of what are the business goals that we're trying to achieve? How are we measure if we achieve that goal? And then let's roll out metrics to measure that, then empowers your teams to make the right decisions to move the needle on the business goal. And then they have all the data that they need, and you're just there to support them, help them come up with, give them more context that they may not have had before, and then support them in moving the needle and being able to help them retrospect on how to improve.
Love it. Bob,
I liked what Mary said about put it in terms of the business goals we want to achieve, because one of the things I've found is that my own imagination is limited sometimes. And if I hand somebody the full problem, they're going to come back with what's needed and more. And so giving them context, giving them, you know, the right problem space, you know, obviously you want to align and set some metrics, but sometimes you can get back even more than what you expected if you take somebody that's a really good leader and you give them the whole problem. And so I think that that's just a little add-on where my mind went.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about metrics. How has your use of, I want to unpack that a little bit. How's your use of metrics evolved as your career has evolved? Raymond?
I had to go first this time because I'm going to steal the low-hanging fruit. There's a big difference between what you can measure and what you should measure. There's a lot of things that are easy to measure, and you probably should be measuring them, but they might not be a good metric. So it's taken me a long time to continue to learn to get there. I'm still trying to figure out what that golden metric is. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I think that's the key there is, you know, great, we've got a bunch of bugs. Is that important? Probably. Is that your metric? Probably not. So.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, you know, from my perspective, there isn't one set of, I don't know, ideal metrics. Those metrics constantly change as the business evolves and as the business objectives that you're trying to achieve evolve. And so I think oftentimes people ask for or want, you know, sort of a static set of, hey, what are my metrics? And then I can sort of, the problem there is people then figure out how to game those metrics, and sort of a well-managed, you know, metric stops reflecting what it actually was meant to, or, you know, needed. And so you also have to balance that with both changing those metrics and evolving those metrics as the business evolves, but also augmenting that with direct conversations with people, and making sure that you're not kind of overly focused on a given metric. And it's a balance of metrics that offset each other and conversations with people and the changing of those metrics as the business needs evolve.
Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going to wrap around again. Steve said something that reminded me. That's the other part of metrics that I think I've adapted to over time and learned about is they're meaningful for a couple of things. They're not necessarily success or failure. They are indicators. They are to point out areas where you should have conversations and where you should be paying attention. And trends matter almost as much as absolute numbers. And that's how I try to set up my metrics all the time. So yeah, metrics are fun.
How about you, Bob?
Yeah, Goodhart's law, I think, is what that one's called. When a metric, I'm going to butcher that. but people will
When a
game the
metric
system.
becomes the target, it ceases to be a good metric. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, no, I think the other thing I would point out is as your scope grows and you have a wider and wider organization, I feel like you're looking for those signals from your metrics, but you want to actually watch fewer of them. And what you want to do is build your teams and systems so that your director is watching everything that that system needs. Maybe you were the director that used to do that, but the couple that only bubble up to you, it's a subset of all of those. So you can take a snapshot of what's going on across the org and know where your attention needs to be.
And how did your decision making change? So everyone on this call likely started as a manager, grew to director, grew to VP. The budget that you're responsible for, and when you get a budget, you have outcomes tied to that budget. So how did your sort of decision framework change or evolve as the size of your budget, grew over the years? Lucy.
So mine might be a little bit of a cop out, but I did a really good job of partnering with my CFO, right? And, the finance team, to be honest. And I think that really enabled me to, be more finance oriented. And I think just more conscious of the things where I could very much start to like rationalize some of the costs in the business. And then also, where do we actually start to reposition actually some of the budget as well? So we started to get slightly creative, right, in terms of how we were demonstrating how, technology was now actually driving some growth initiatives in the business as well, and not just being that cost center that everybody, thinks we are. So I think that has been a really important change and shift in how I was able to kind of better manage budgeting, because I think as you start, it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? You're used to, managing a small amount of money, and then all of a sudden you're like multi-millions of dollars, right? And so, the buck stops with you. And so having that partnership with your finance team and, certain leaders is really something that I've taken, and it's actually, position me better for like when I do have to ask for like more, or I now have a very intelligent way of like talking to the business about how I need to finance our initiatives, or where I can actually see where I can pull costs out of the business as well.
Are you tying ROI to any of that as you talk with them, or?
Yeah, and I'm also finding that we're actually also, and it might just be because of our maturity as a business, right? But we're also demonstrating, new opportunities of where ROI before was actually not even discussed, right? So we're exploring new opportunities where actually we can pull, direct results out of some of these initiatives that we're doing, and demonstrate to the business that you can achieve ROI from X, right? So yeah.
Matthew?
Yeah, I really want to build on where Lucy started there. Like a ton of my job is establishing a narrative with the stakeholders in the business about where we're investing and where we aren't. And that relationship with your finance and accounting teams is core to your success. And so a part of what I do with my EMs is we have a forecasting practice. It's almost always wrong, but we're trying to think ahead and then true up in our narrative where we've missed. I think another really big shift for me, and I assume for many people on the call, is those numbers get big, you as a human being have to think very differently about them. $10,000 to me personally is a heck of a lot of money. As part of a $10 million budget, it's almost but not quite de minimis. And so I try to coach and others, don't think about that specific dollar amount. Think about it as a proportion of the whole. Is that 1% of our spend? Okay, that's one way to think about it. Is it 50% of our spend? That's a way bigger number, independent of the actual, specific dollar amount we're talking about, because it can be scary, maybe bordering on terrifying, making multi-million-dollar decisions, because somewhere in there, you're a human being and you're trying to rationalize that in the way that you might think about personal finance. And those are wildly different things.
So,
go ahead, Mary.
I sort of a strange answer to this question in that I was put in a very lucky position where I had a $30 million budget when I was a manager. And so I actually had to figure out this skill set much sooner in my career than most folks. And I want to echo what Lucy and Matthew said, which is that the finance team is an incredibly great partner. The thing that I think is really fun and interesting and may shift your mindset is asking yourself what if questions that align with the business needs right now. So when I was owning the $30 million budget, it was a lot of hardware because we still had we were still on-prem, and finance would come to me and say, could we reduce our gross margin by like 2%? Is that a thing we can do? And that it's a really great what if question, because then it's like, yeah, I mean, we could if we did this, and this. And then you start to think about how, if there's a problem in the business or if there's a goal that the business is trying to achieve, you get to think about it from the perspective of like, what is possible? What if? Is there a way to do this? And then that helps you shift your mindset of looking at the budget as like tools that you can use to achieve business outcomes or things that you can change to achieve other business outcomes. And I think that's a really fun approach.
Like that. Bob, how about you?
One thing I just wanted to add is I feel like as a manager, as somebody that was, in the middle of the org, it was often, here's your box, play in it. So I have this many people, we're spending this much money. And so you make it work, right? And you just have this, like, the guardrails of how much can be spent in your bubble, in your org. That's not there. When you're thinking about the large budget, you need to think of what box doesn't even exist yet. I'm sure almost everyone on here didn't have massive AI spend box 2 years ago, right? And now it's a new box, and we have to be investing in it, and we have to think about how it fits. So, and then the other thing I think is interesting is the different ways to look at the finances. So there's total dollars, the 10,000, but 10,000 is a tiny number if it's actually 1.2 cents per transaction. Oh, actually, that's not that big a deal. The overall margin isn't going to move if you're breaking the cost of your COGS down. So definitely it feels like something that working with your finance team, or even, I don't know, taking a finance class of some kind, could be interesting to help you understand how that side of the business thinks of things.
Took us 37 minutes to get the A word out there, so that's actually pretty impressive. AI is what I'm talking about. So, thanks, Bob. Matthew.
Yeah, it's something Mary said really reminded me of a different point here, and it's depending on the size and scale of your business, capital expenditure and operating expenditure in publicly traded companies, those are the deciding factors way more than 100 other things that you probably showed up thinking would be important. And even in a startup or maybe outside of the publicly traded company sense, your unit economics in the business, where Bob just had us unit rate per transaction, those numbers start to matter materially in a way that they just never do. If I just kind of got this fixed engineering manager budget that I'm trying to execute against, radically changes how you think about things when those start to become more important in a business.
And I'm going to pick on you a little bit. If there's someone watching who's not super familiar with the difference between CapEx and OpEx, super quick, like what goes in which bucket and how do you differentiate?
Yeah, capital expenditures are material investments in your business. That could be R&D, it might be hardware and equipment, and it certainly could be capitalizable labor. And to the public markets, that's good spend. That looks great. OpEx is basically everything else, keeping the lights on, your maintenance, your support costs, minor improvements against your product that don't count as capital expenditures. As those numbers get bigger, the street does not like you anymore, and you have a complicated set of problems. So you try to structure your team and your spend to have a really strong capital investment story, and a story of, I'm managing down operating expenditures, and we're not seeing those grow proportionally over time.
That's great.
Anybody can correct me there. I'm definitely don't have a finance degree.
Perfect. I thank you. I want to talk a little bit about methodologies because I think as a manager, when you're overseeing a team or two teams, yeah, everybody's got some flavor of agile that they're using or whatever. But as you grow and you layer more teams under your purview, are there frameworks aside from methodologies that you start to leverage? And just maybe walk me through how the concept of methodologies and frameworks evolves as your leadership journey evolves. Steve.
I'll maybe start it off, I guess. But I think you kind of move from a practitioner of specific methodologies to a pragmatist and focus around kind of principles underneath those methodologies. And so something that enforces or provides tight feedback loops, limits work in progress, makes work visible, like creates space for reflection. Those are super important from my perspective as a kind of principles underneath it. The details around, is it Scrum, is it Kanban, become less important. And I think having the flexibility and I guess understanding and giving, I think, some of the empowerment to your team to decide how they want to work, and discussing trade-offs and pros and cons with them, can be a lot more enlightening and empowering than sort of being that I'll say ruthless kind of practitioner of Scrum fundamentals or Kanban fundamentals, etc.
Brandon?
Yeah, I feel like Steve and I might be the same person today. Like, I think you said every word I was going to say, maybe in a slightly different order. I'll add into that one. I made a mistake early on of being highly opinionated. Oh, thou must run Scrum. And at the end of the day, who cares? Right? Like, these are the things that I need from you. What I think is important from this level is to really articulate those principles that you're looking for. The other thing that I think is important is to me is important is to build the ceremony and the cadence, right? Because I think that the business is going to be coming at you from so many different angles. There's going to be a billion different priorities. Reminding them that it happens on a cadence. It happens during these ceremonies. You don't have to like drop everything and fly to the brightest light. So, and I think Steve also said that's building space, right? That's building space for your teams to actually execute, and to actually pay attention to the principles that you've put out there. So, thanks, Steve. Good job.
Bob, how about you?
I was pretty sure the whether or not anybody cared about Scrum or Kanban would already be taken, and it was. The one thing I would add is I think it's important to match your org in the phase it's at. We're a pretty new product growth is our phase right now. And so we have a certain cadence, and that cadence has, bi-weekly meetings on Fridays. And so, what matters to me is I don't care if you're Scrum or if you're Kanban, but ideally you're ending your thing, whatever that is, on a Thursday. So we have the kind of information we want and the learnings on Friday. If you end it on Mondays or Tuesdays, well, we're halfway done with something. It just doesn't hit the same way. So I feel like it's finding those pieces of the process you want alignment on and pushing that down is definitely a piece of the puzzle.
What about you, Mary?
Yeah, I agree strongly with everything that's been said so far, and happy to see that we've all kind of came to the same conclusion. I view these tools as well as, and I'm going to extend it to technical tools, as just tools in your tool belt. Some of them solve some problems better than other problems. It depends on what problems your team has and how you want to solve for that problem, and it's just different tools you can use to solve that problem. The only thing I generally try to avoid is waterfall in software development. But like sometimes it is necessary if you have a hard deadline with a customer that you need to fulfill. So again, it's like it's just a tool in your tool belt. for the right situation. And I also love what Bob said around the thing that is most important is that you get the visibility you need, the reporting you need, the information that you need. And so finding a way to align the different teams' processes so that you can get all that data and information in a streamlined way is really important. And that's a mistake I've also made in the past by just telling teams you can use whatever system you want because I don't care, and then having to figure out how to pick up the pieces later on getting the visibility I needed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bob, how about you?
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna add on. Mary said something that made me remember, Scrum and Kanban, there's a right thing for the right situation. If you came up from product engineering or you came up from DevOps, you're used to a certain type of work. Our DevOps team is 50% reactive. And so Kanban is a style that makes more sense. They know what project is up. Did they work on it all day, every day? Well, it depends. How was prod running and what random injection of, oh, I have a requirement I could have told you about 6 months ago and didn't showed up today. So having the right process as you grow and you have different types of teams underneath you, the type of process that makes sense to them might not be what you're used to, and that's fine.
I'd love to morph slightly into organizational design, and I know it's probably a little bit different. Some of you focus more on infrastructure teams, some of you more on software engineering or product development, but how do you think about org design, and have you found structures that you tried one, moved to another, and it was 10 times better? Brandon. And you're on mute,
No,
so-
yeah. The what I wanted to mention before somebody answers the actual question is AI is throwing this all into disarray. So, in the 2 months ago or 6 months ago, I would have said, just go buy yourself team topologies and everything's in there, right? Like figure out the ones you like and then you just deploy them. But we're actually starting to do some experiments with just smaller teams. And I'm a big believer in the team concept. I believe that humans, feed off of each other in interesting ways that humans and AI won't ever. So I still believe that there is space for a team, but we also believe that, there's a communication and organization tax that's going to be had. So we're trying out 3-person teams. Now we're going to try it in very small experiments. And maybe 3 is wrong, but I keep going back to the holy hand grenade of Antioch from Monty Python's Holy Grail. 3 is the number thou shalt count to, and the number of the count shall be 3. So that's what we're doing. I thought I'd put that out there to see if anybody else is doing anything interesting around just the formation of orgs and teams.
Yeah. And who's on those teams? Just curious. Roles.
And that's what we're playing around with, right? You can even with 3 people, you can combine it in hundreds of different ways, right? So we're putting a subject matter expert on there, a senior developer and a junior developer. We're putting a security conscious person on there, and a developer and an equality or optimized person. So we're trying a lot of different combinations. I don't know that there's going to be one right answer necessarily, except that I think you're gonna find that certain people work well together, and it might not be the role and it might not be their background. It might just be their interpersonal skills. So I think we're messing around with it. We're doing our very first team right now. In 6 months, hopefully I've tried this 4 times and I'll be able to tell you with clarity what we found.
Love it. Mary, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I love what Brandon said around how AI is changing, because I think it's a good overlay for everything we're saying. The thing that I like is that the thing that I think is happening, the trend is that we're moving from like hordes of organized armies of software engineers, and instead moving to small, highly skilled units that are doing like full stack understanding, that are highly skilled people that are executing on specific things. One thing I do want to throw in the mix is that people talk about Conway's law and how, like, be careful because you're going to ship your org chart. I embrace Conway's law, and I make my org chart look like the thing I want to ship. And so I like to organize teams around what the customer experience is going to look like. I try to organize teams around customer personas or logical separations of areas of the product, so that I can create cohesive experiences for those for the personas that are most important. And then to Brandon's point, one thing that I'm loving is that I also like to build full context teams. I don't like having separate QA. I don't like having separate DevOps. I mean, well, to a certain extent, we need separate DevOps, but I want everyone on an engineering team to have full context of how to do their infrastructure, how to monitor their system in production, how to test it. And so this is like nice for me because I already liked this, and now we're creating tools that make this easier. So that's the size of the team, as Brandon points out, is different depending on now that we're introducing AI, it can be different. But the thing is now the blocker that I worry about is how much context people can keep in their head. And that usually is what limits team size for me.
That's great. How about for you, Bob?
Steve might have been ahead of me if you want to go. Steve.
Oh, sorry.
Sure,
The numbers keep switching as people. Steve.
All good. Yeah, I think my addition to this conversation here, I think, is really around what I've started to see as the impact of AI really flattening and consolidating different specialties together, right? And I think I'll be honest, I'd love to hear thoughts from others here, but I still haven't figured out how we get to a point in the industry where we can actually build skills across disciplines in different individuals and give them the opportunity to do that without time and without, like just bringing in someone who can actually understand business context, outcomes that we're trying to achieve, UI, UX design best practices, QA best practices, right? Back-end engineering, front-end engineering, data engineering, infrastructure engineering, right? All of that is really combining together. And when you have a, super senior principal IC or whatnot, like they can often bring a lot of that and then wield some of the power of AI and agents together to produce fantastic things. How do you do that kind of effectively at scale with organizations that don't and individuals who don't have all of those skills and all of that context? And how do you build skills in each of those in each of those areas across different individuals? Like what I have tried to do is I guess maybe a little bit of what Brandon is trying, but like put people with different mentalities together and let them learn from each other. And build that kind of effectively over time, but you have to also keep modifying it so that people get different perspectives and continue to expand the, I'll say, horizontal footprint of the disciplines that they're concerned with.
How about you, Bob? Sorry.
Back to the original question, there are some things I think that are still true. There's what Mary called out is, do you have horizontal teams? Our DevOps right now is across all of our teams. Our QA had been as well. Security covers every team, right? And so having those, are you going to be able to embed, or is there a horizontal layer, and which ones? Those are a major decision in org design that still matter. But I'm fully on board. We're aiming for a 2.5 person team for one of our AI experiments. We just had an in-person hackathon last week. We had an offsite, and we spent a lot of the time doing an in-person hackathon. And the amount of work 3 people got done was amazing. We leveraged new tools. Like I made designs with Figma Make, and anybody that knows me knows you do not want my designs normally. But the actual Figma, it glossed over the fact that I'm terrible at UI, and it made it. And then, we loaded that up to Claude, and it made the front end for us. And so like the ability to have that, cross-functional group with a small number of people using some tools that cover for the fact that we're missing a role. It's really neat. But I feel like I'm going to follow up with Brandon in maybe 3 months to see how his 6-month journey is going, and share some notes, because I don't know how that's going to work either. But it's definitely an experiment that we're trying.
We started to unpack this, but if I'm a manager right now for a small team and I want to progress my career into executive leadership, how should I be thinking about AI? How is it impacting your teams? How is it impacting decisions at the executive leadership level? Would give us a little bit of insight into what you guys are feeling on a day in, day out basis. We'll keep with you.
Yeah. I think there's so much advice that we gave early on that says you have to stay out of the weeds, get out of the weeds. Like your job is to make other people in the weeds. I don't see a path to being an effective leader of a tech organization without knowing how it works, what's possible. So, I've written more code in the last 2 months than I have, in the past 4 years. And a lot of it can be thrown away. Like it's put it together. It's a proof of concept. It's something, but you got to get your hands dirty. You have to understand a lot of how it works, because if you're going to influence the art of the possible with leadership when it comes to technology, and be the voice with leadership about what we can do with this and what we should be scared of, what's the risk out there, like that, you have to get your hands dirty. You have to carve out time for yourself to understand what it is that's happening in a daily basis and what the trends are. I got real excited. I started figuring out MCDs, and now they're gone, and it's all CLIs because a week passed. So I think it's important just to be deeper on this journey than most things, because we didn't have this. Our career that got us here didn't include, well, back in 2006, I did all this AI stuff. Maybe somebody did. I sure did. So I just don't have that. I don't have that memory muscle yet.
Love it. Matthew, how about you?
Yeah, Bob and I might be the same person today in a different way there from Brandon and Steve, but you have to use it every day. And I would normally introduce myself as post-technical. I really haven't written code over the last decade. And over the last 2 months, I've built 3 applications, and most of them have been throwaways, purely for the experience of getting to understand how this shifts development on the ground. And I think that if you're the proverbial EM in your question, Ted, and you're trying to think about how do you position yourself for the future and be an executive in 3 to 5 years, you've got to be thinking about how this shifts, like all of the dynamics in software development. How do you use AI to make a team far more effective? And there's a truth that Bob said that I've started to, I don't even think I've got my head around it. Like, we've spent our entire careers thinking that engineering costs are the highest cost in the business, and we have to be super precious about what we ask people to do, and it's got to be super aligned because it's expensive, these engineer salaries. And now software is almost disposable. Is a wild shift, and that is, however you internalize that, however you think about rapidity in software development across a team to get to the business outcome, and then not being precious about all the code you didn't write along the way. There's a sea change there that I'm probably not even doing a good job articulating, but it's consuming a lot of my waking cycles.
Yep, absolutely. Lucy?
Yeah. So I think a wise person once told me, never delegate curiosity. So I take that to heart in everywhere I go. But I think also, just to add, and I totally agree, and I've been fiddling around with some things as well, but I think one of the biggest things that I'm trying to make sure that we're doing is helping the business to identify those areas where we can start to experiment, right? And it's not like there's the obvious ones, but then it's how are you bringing, your members along with you, right? To be able to do that, because it's our responsibility as well to make sure that the business is just as educated as we are on what this power can do, right? We can communicate and coordinate and talk about its benefits, but you really need them to hold it, feel it, touch it, and do it so that they can understand the benefits of what it's going to do. Otherwise, the conversation just keeps going back and forth.
Yeah. Seeing a lot of that.
Sorry, I had to jump back in to talk to my other self over here. Like I've been thinking about this as like, is this the new compiler layer, right? You have like people used to write in assembly and now they don't because you made a layer called C, and then they stopped writing in C because you made layers that made it more easy to write and coordinate with the code. And so like, is this just a new layer on top of that where it's like, here's prompts and what I want it to do, and then it makes code, but I haven't looked at an assembly code since that one class in college, right? Like this is it's a layer that just works. And I'm wondering, like, is there a shift in how, anyway, I'm going to step off the soapbox because I actually had an answer to the question that I wanted to add on, which is, I think there's also the buckets that you need to focus on. When you think about AI, it's developer efficiency. You have your Claude Code, your Copilot, your various tools there. You have tooling. Your other departments bought something that says they use AI and they don't really know how to get the most out of it and need a partner. And your role there isn't necessarily, I'm the tools person, but it is helping them understand how to think about it and grow their own understanding. There's InfoSec and what do they wish we aren't passing? What data is not being passed to the AI? Because that's super important in a mortgage transaction. The actual PII, our customers have contracts that are very, very strong in certain language. And then within the product, right? There is a mechanism that is, I go to a non-deterministic and I don't know what the answer is going to be. And I jump back into the deterministic flow. So I think as you think about AI and where to lean in, it's framing what thing am I trying to accomplish and what's the tooling that I'm going to use there, bringing AI into our main products in a new way. Well, you need that to be production scale, right? And so like resiliency and what's your failover system when that thing is down, because that startup you're calling wasn't a business 18 months ago. So they might not be a business 18 months from now. Like you just have to have this full picture of how to maximize the AI in your product or whichever flavor of AI you're leaning into.
Well, Brandon?
Yeah, just real briefly, and yeah, it's all these things. It's fun. I've read about it, right? It's like the most fun you've had in your career. It's kind of like when you first start coding, right? It's all of a sudden everything's different. From the perspective of what do you do right now? Like I think somebody said it right. This is an inflection point, and I think it's a good opportunity to take advantage of it. It's a level playing field. So that's one piece of advice that I give everybody. The other thing is this is a great opportunity to make friends with subject matter experts that have other talents than you. Your engineering talents and insights and instincts are all going to be useful, especially as AI is young and still pretty dumb and still does very, very stupid things. I got my CPO is like the biggest AI user I've ever seen. And I've watched him over the course of 4 months work his way into a classic engineering problem of race conditions. I'm like, Jamie, you just created yourself a race condition. You need to put a queue in place. He's like, oh, what's a queue? So make friends with people who have passions and understanding and knowledge outside of engineering. And the coupling of those things, I think, are going to be amazing. I think long-term AI is going to make us all engineers at some level. And I think our job is going to be to like make it so that, it doesn't crash the world, because there's people like Jamie out there who has all the knowledge and all the time in the world. And if I keep joking with him, he's going to create the singularity by himself, but because he doesn't have any governor. He's just like go full force forward all the time. But anyway.
Well, there were these, this probably was 10 years ago, but like Power BI and all these tools that finance was using were theoretically supposed to be regulated by IT, but all of a sudden finance got to play with them and they were going rogue. And we saw these big companies that had dichotomy between these rogue groups that were using technology, and then the technology team had no idea what was going on. So anyway, it created a lot of issues, and I wonder if we're going to start to see some of that. And Mary, I'll let you answer the question. But if anyone's having that issue where they've got sort of renegade or rogue AI floating around out there, I'd love to hear what you're doing to control that a bit. But Mary, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say treat AI like a gift. I think I was basically what Brandon said, is that all of these things are tools. They're all things that you can use to solve problems, and understanding them and being able to help your teams figure out how to use them is incredibly useful. So playing with them a little bit yourself if you can. But yeah, Ted, your perspective on there's a lot of AI created things out there. This actually reminds me a lot of when I was in DevOps and we made it really easy for engineers to spin up infrastructure. And then you just have a bunch of infrastructure sprawl everywhere. And so it's a very similar principle with very similar perspectives. We're doing automated reporting on AI token usage, and we're going to be rolling it up per team. And so we'll start to get insight into where these spends are coming from, so that we can go do the same thing we do with cloud spend or anything else, where we see a spike and we say, hey, what's going on over there? Yeah, it looks like maybe some things are going sideways. So that can help. That's like a good way to create reporting that can make it easier to figure out where things might be going off the rails. But that doesn't address like legal and data privacy issues, which I will let someone else talk about.
Love it. Bob?
Yeah, we have a similar thing. We're using Light LLM for all of our developer token usage. So it's a local proxy pass through. It's inside the VPC, so you can enforce certain things like it's not running somebody's home project. But one other thing we are doing when it comes to AI and thinking about it, it's if I see that massive bill, my first reaction is, ooh, what do we get? Right. And not, oh, don't spend money. Because going back to earlier, I think it was Matthew talking about, $10,000 is not a big number anymore, right? Like you're worried about the big spend. If somebody went out and spent $600 on tokens this week, I am very curious what they built, right? Like you obviously had a big research project or something, or hey, you're using the wrong model. Opus is expensive as heck. Don't do that just to solve your small problem, right? So, it's an opportunity for learning. And I think just making sure that people understand there's some guardrail here, but again, what we want is that exploration to turn into something useful for the business. And if that's what you did with your $600 of tokens, I want to celebrate it, not tell you to spend 500 next time.
Matthew?
Yeah, there's at least one point I'll again agree really strongly with Bob on. Like in an R&D sense, this spend is healthy. Let's enable people to experiment and learn, and hopefully learn really important things. And let's not get too precious about the dollars. But that has to be contextualized with your finance team and your overall narrative. But Mary said two of my favorite words a second ago, and it's legal and sort of data privacy. And I'm in a highly regulated industry. We're in education, we're in schools. There's not an opportunity or an option that we can contemplate where someone in marketing has vibe coded this cool app that's now exfiltrating all of our data. And so, a theme that I think we've all kind of talked about, but I'll say really explicitly, as an engineering executive, a real part of your job is how the rest of the organization thinks about engineering. And here it is. Like, we have to create guardrails or provide systems, things like N8N or Replit, that give you governance and controls over what those AI applications are accessing and what they're doing, become like first-class citizens. We cannot proceed with this idea if everybody's just cloud coding on their laptop and whatever data they have access to, they can have access to. It's a really exciting time, and it's a more than a little scary time. And I don't remember who said it. I think it was Brandon who was talking about a CPO. Like, citizen builders are awesome, but they don't have any of the training that we as engineers do around anything, around security, around privacy, around data, around code conventions. Like, it is the wild west. And I'm finding, I mean, even just the last 2 weeks, I've spent more time thinking about how I enable this in the rest of my business than I've spent actually like running my engineering team. That's a bit hyperbolic, but it's not probably very far from the truth. Go ahead, Steve.
Matthew, I was just going to build on that. I think like I'm seeing the same thing where I'll say organizations or departments that traditionally haven't had to think about those guardrails from a security and compliance and risk standpoint now have to be educated and have to have the frameworks and understanding to realize why that matters and why that's important, right? And trying to explain to your marketing, leader, like, why is that not a good idea to have everybody have access to all of your customer data all the time, right? And why is that a problem? Sometimes can be a challenge where they're wanting to just go do things themselves, or go have their department go off and use that AI spend to go do something in an unbounded way. And I think it is that kind of inflection point that we're in now is about helping the rest of kind of the other disciplines maybe understand some of the values of engineering and cost efficiency and resource efficiency as well, right? I think that's something that the AI industry overall is struggling with, as billions and trillions get thrown at hardware and data centers and energy and power, right? We're starting to see, wait, is this not free, right? Is it okay for I don't know, my 10-year-old to be able to go use a whole bunch of tokens to go develop an app on his own? Does he have to pay for that, or is that just a right and a privilege that he should have, right? And where does that business model come from? I think we're still, I'll say, in the early days of figuring out some of that.
Absolutely. I have a final knockout question, but I do want to open it up. If anyone has any questions for the panel, feel free to speak now. Otherwise, I will go into our last question here. So the viewers of this are mainly tech leaders who are looking to get into an executive seat. If I'm a manager of software engineering and I want to be in your seat, hopefully the near term, what should I start doing tomorrow to point my career path in that direction? Let's go, Mary.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can do is start thinking beyond your team, beyond your org department, and think about the entire company. That building that knowledge and understanding of how does the whole company work together and how can you support the whole company is, I think, critical to being an executive. If this is a helpful tool, the way I always think about it is, what would I do if I were the CEO of this company? What would I be worrying about if I were the CEO of this company? And then make those your things that you worry about and you figure out how to mitigate, so that you can then think from that mindset of an executive. And that's something that I would, if you're going about it the good way, that would be I would recommend. There is a book that, if you want to go about it in a way that could be questionable, but I think is still effective, there's a book called Stealing the Corner Office that I find to be I read it, someone recommended it to me, I find it to be very amusing. And it is actually have some good practical tips for